The celebration at Blackthorn Palace glittered like a second sunrise. Crystal chandeliers poured golden light across polished marble floors, musicians filled the grand ballroom with triumphant waltzes, and banners bearing the Blackthorn crest hung proudly from towering stone columns. Noble families from every corner of England gathered beneath painted ceilings, eager to welcome home the man they believed embodied honor itself. Duke Adrian Blackthorn had spent months negotiating peace beyond the kingdom's borders, and tonight his return was meant to mark not only political victory, but the beginning of a happier chapter for his growing family. At the center of the ballroom stood Duchess Isabella Ashcroft, her pale blue gown embroidered with delicate silver vines that shimmered whenever candlelight touched them. 8 months pregnant, she carried herself with quiet elegance despite the weight of the child she bore. One hand rested gently upon the curve of her stomach while the other greeted guests with warmth that never appeared forced. She remembered every servant's name, thanked every musician personally, and smiled kindly at nervous young footmen who accidentally spilled wine while rushing through the crowded hall. Those who served the palace loved her because her kindness had never depended upon ceremony. Only one pair of observant eyes refused to soften. Dowager Duchess Eleanor Blackthorn watched from her carved walnut chair beside the fireplace. Age had silvered her hair but sharpened her judgment. Throughout the evening she studied every entrance, every whispered conversation, every anxious glance exchanged among Adrian's advisors. An uneasiness settled over her heart that she could neither explain nor dismiss. Outside, distant thunder rolled beyond the palace walls. The orchestra lifted into a brighter melody. A herald struck the marble floor with his staff. The Duke of Blackthorn has returned. The great doors swung open. Every conversation stopped. Every noble turned toward the entrance expecting a joyful reunion. Instead, confusion swept through the hall before anyone found words. Adrian entered wearing formal black embroidered with gold, every inch the victorious duke the kingdom admired. Yet he was not alone. His hand held that of Lady Vivian Lancaster. She wore deep burgundy velvet adorned with jewels that caught the candlelight almost as brilliantly as her practiced smile. Her graceful posture suggested humility, but satisfaction flickered briefly behind her eyes before vanishing beneath a mask of delicate gratitude. A murmur spread through the ballroom. Isabella's smile lingered only a heartbeat before quietly fading. She took one careful step forward. "My lord," she said gently. Adrian offered only the smallest nod. He released neither Isabella's gaze nor Vivian's hand. The silence became unbearable. Finally Adrian addressed the assembled guests. "Many of you know Lady Vivian only by name. You should know her by her courage. Years ago, during an attack upon my convoy, she saved my life. Everything I possess today exists because of her sacrifice." Gasps traveled through the gathering. Vivian lowered her eyes modestly. "I owe her a debt that can never be repaid," Adrian continued. "Therefore Lady Vivian will remain at Blackthorn Palace under my protection from this day forward." Several nobles exchanged uneasy looks. The musicians lowered their instruments. Even the servants stopped moving. Dowager Eleanor slowly rose from her chair. "Adrian," she said firmly, "there are matters requiring private discussion before declarations are made." Vivian answered before he could. "Your Grace, I never wished to burden anyone." Her voice sounded sweet enough to melt suspicion. Adrian squeezed her hand reassuringly. "You burden no one." The word struck Isabella harder than any shouted insult could have done. Still she refused to lose her composure. She approached until only a few feet separated husband and wife. Her eyes searched his face, hoping to discover uncertainty hidden beneath confidence. She found none. "Where," she asked softly, "shall I stand?" The question hung in the air like fragile glass. Adrian answered without hesitation. "Lady Vivian belongs here now. If you cannot accept her, leave." The orchestra fell completely silent. Outside, thunder cracked across the darkening sky. Nobody breathed. Nobody dared move. Isabella looked at the man she had loved since girlhood, the father of the child growing beneath her heart, and realized the distance between them had become greater than oceans. No anger appeared upon her face. No accusation escaped her lips. Instead, she slowly removed the simple gold wedding ring from her finger. Its quiet touch against crystal echoed through the motionless ballroom as she placed it beside Adrian's untouched wine glass. Her trembling hand returned protectively to her unborn son. She met Adrian's eyes one final time. "I pray our child never learns how easily his father abandoned his mother." Not a single tear fell. That somehow made the words unbearable. Several ladies quietly lowered their heads. An elderly butler turned away to hide moist eyes. Young servants who adored their duchess bit their lips to keep from crying aloud. Even hardened noblemen shifted uneasily beneath the weight of what they had witnessed. Only Vivian remained perfectly composed. A nearly invisible smile touched the corner of her mouth before disappearing again behind carefully arranged sympathy. Dowager Eleanor crossed the floor, intending to stop Isabella before she reached the doors. Instead, Isabella gently kissed the older woman's trembling hand. "Thank you," she whispered. Those two words carried years of affection. Eleanor could answer only with tears. Isabella gathered the small traveling case prepared earlier for Adrian's expected journey home, though now it would accompany only her. Without another glance behind, she walked through rows of silent guests, her footsteps steady despite the child pressing heavily against her weary body. No one blocked her path. Nobles bowed respectfully as she passed, while servants stepped aside with broken hearts. The massive palace doors opened before her, revealing sheets of cold rain falling beneath a charcoal sky. She climbed into the waiting carriage alone, resting one hand over her unborn son as the horses pulled away into the storm. High above, hidden behind rain-streaked glass, Lady Vivian watched the disappearing carriage and smiled, believing her carefully woven deception had only just begun. Rain swallowed the carriage almost the moment it left the palace gates. The horses strained against the gale while icy wind lashed the windows with relentless force, turning the familiar royal road into a ribbon of mud and darkness. Isabella leaned against the padded seat, one hand protecting the child beneath her heart and the other gripping the leather strap beside the door. She closed her eyes only once, whispering a quiet prayer that her son would know kindness even if she no longer did. The coachman urged the frightened horses onward, but another crash of thunder shattered the night. A jagged bolt of lightning struck an ancient oak beside the road, sending burning branches crashing across the path. The horses screamed, reared wildly, and lurched sideways before the driver could steady them. The carriage skidded across soaked earth. One wheel struck a hidden stone. Everything overturned. Wood splintered. Glass exploded. The heavy coach rolled down a muddy embankment before crashing into the swollen river below. Freezing water burst through the broken door. The current seized the carriage immediately. Inside, Isabella struggled to breathe as icy water climbed around her waist. Pain tore across her body with terrifying intensity. She pressed both arms around her unborn child, refusing to surrender even as another violent contraction stole the air from her lungs. The river dragged the shattered carriage farther into darkness. Not far away, Captain Nathan Hale guided his horse along the flooded countryside after delivering supplies to a nearby village. Once commander of an elite Royal Guard unit, he had abandoned palace life years earlier, choosing quiet service over royal politics. The storm had nearly drowned every sound, yet above the thunder he caught the unmistakable cry of terrified horses. Without hesitation he galloped toward the river. The sight before him froze his blood. The carriage was sinking. Nathan threw himself from the saddle, secured a rope around a riverside elm, and plunged into the furious current. Freezing water battered him against floating debris, but years of military discipline overcame exhaustion. He reached the half-submerged carriage, forced open its twisted door, and found Isabella barely conscious, still shielding the life inside her instead of herself. For one brief moment their eyes met. "I won't leave my baby," she whispered. "You won't," Nathan answered. "You'll both live." He lifted her into his arms and fought the current with every remaining ounce of strength. Twice the river nearly swept them away. Twice the rope saved them. When he finally reached the muddy bank, Isabella collapsed against the earth, shivering uncontrollably while another contraction bent her forward in agony. There isn't much time, Nathan realized. A tiny chapel stood less than a mile away atop a low hill. Gathering every reserve of strength, he wrapped Isabella inside his heavy cloak and carried her through rain that stung like needles. Each painful step echoed with desperate urgency as church bells swayed violently in the wind. The chapel door opened before he reached it. An elderly nun named Sister Agnes had seen lantern light through the storm. Without asking names or titles, she welcomed them inside. The humble sanctuary smelled of beeswax, damp stone, and old cedar. A village midwife named Martha happened to be sheltering there after tending another family across the valley. One glance at Isabella told her everything. The child is coming tonight. Hours blurred into endless pain. Nathan remained outside the small room, kneeling in silent prayer while rain hammered against stained glass windows. He had faced battlefields without fear, yet the cries of a mother struggling to bring life into the world unsettled him far more deeply than swords ever had. Near dawn, the chapel suddenly became frighteningly quiet. No infant cried. No voices spoke. Nathan's heart sank. Then Martha emerged carrying a tiny bundle wrapped in white linen. "The boy lives," she whispered, tears shining in her weary eyes. "But he is very weak." Nathan entered carefully. Isabella lay exhausted beneath rough blankets, her face pale but peaceful despite overwhelming weariness. The fragile newborn rested beside her, his breathing faint enough that each breath seemed uncertain. She kissed the child's forehead. "Oliver," she murmured. "My little Oliver." Sunrise slowly pierced the retreating storm, sending pale light through colored glass onto mother and son. It felt less like victory than borrowed hope. During the following weeks, Isabella recovered within the nearby village. She never revealed she had once been Duchess of Blackthorn. Instead, she quietly sold the last jewels still hidden among her belongings. Every coin purchased food, blankets, and a neglected farmhouse abandoned after years of decay. Villagers believed she sought only a peaceful place to raise her son, yet before long another purpose emerged. One hungry orphan appeared at her door. Then another. Then 3 frightened sisters whose parents had died during winter fever. No child left hungry. No child slept outside. They began calling her mother before they knew her name. Meanwhile, Blackthorn Palace descended into silence. Adrian wandered corridors that suddenly felt impossibly vast. Isabella's embroidery remained unfinished beside the nursery window. Tiny baby clothes she had sewn still rested neatly folded inside polished oak drawers. Every room preserved her gentle presence while painfully emphasizing her absence. Half the household servants resigned within weeks. Some could not forgive the Duke. Others simply could not bear serving inside a home emptied of compassion. Lady Vivian attempted to fill the silence with lavish dinners, musicians, and cheerful conversation, yet every celebration ended awkwardly. Even guests who admired Adrian's reputation now whispered behind jeweled fans. They had witnessed the Duchess leave with grace no cruelty deserved. Dowager Duchess Eleanor withdrew almost completely from palace life. She refused invitations to dine with Adrian. She refused to acknowledge Vivian. Instead, she spent long hours inside her private study sorting documents into careful bundles while writing steadily beneath candlelight. Her loyal maid noticed sealed letters accumulating inside a carved walnut chest, each marked only with the Blackthorn crest. One cold evening, Eleanor summoned the family solicitor. Before trembling witnesses, she sealed a final envelope with dark crimson wax. "This is for Adrian alone," she instructed quietly. "He must not read it until truth becomes the only thing left that can save him." Only days later, the Dowager Duchess peacefully slipped away before sunrise, carrying her deepest sorrow into eternity. Adrian buried his grandmother beneath ancient yew trees overlooking the family chapel, yet even through fresh grief he could not bring himself to break the seal she had entrusted to him. He locked the mysterious letter inside his desk instead, believing time would eventually quiet every wound. Far away, in the laughter of children gathering around a woman they knew only as Mother Isabella, destiny patiently prepared the answer he was still too blind to seek. Nearly 2 years passed, yet Blackthorn Palace never recovered the warmth it had lost the night Isabella walked away. Dust gathered in corridors once bright with laughter, fireplaces burned lower than before, and every celebration arranged by Lady Vivian felt strangely hollow. Guests accepted invitations out of courtesy, stayed only briefly, then returned home carrying uneasy whispers that the proud estate had become little more than a magnificent shell. Adrian buried himself in endless duties. He negotiated treaties, visited neighboring estates, reviewed military reports, signed countless documents. None of it silenced the memory of a single sentence spoken beneath glittering chandeliers. "I pray our child never learns how easily his father abandoned his mother." Those words returned every night. Vivian noticed the change. She became increasingly impatient, urging Adrian to announce their engagement publicly before the kingdom questioned her place beside him. "We have waited long enough," she insisted one evening while musicians played softly in the drawing room. "People expect certainty." Adrian stared into the fire instead of answering. His silence unsettled her. For the first time since Isabella's departure, obedience no longer came naturally. 3 days later, an unexpected message reached the palace. An elderly maid named Margaret lay dying in the servants' infirmary. She begged to speak with the Duke alone. Adrian recognized her immediately. Margaret had served his family since his childhood and had once carried him through the gardens after he scraped his knees climbing ancient apple trees. Her face now appeared pale beneath deep wrinkles, while every breath seemed painfully earned. "You must forgive an old woman," she whispered. "There are sins heavier than death." Adrian knelt beside her bed. What troubles you? Tears rolled silently across Margaret's cheeks. I accepted money. His brow tightened. Money from whom? Lady Vivian. The room suddenly felt colder. Margaret struggled for breath before continuing. She ordered servants to burn every letter the Duchess sent during your travels. She paid footmen to claim Lady Isabella had spoken against you. She bribed stable hands, chambermaids, even visiting messengers. Anyone who refused lost employment. Those who obeyed were rewarded. Adrian stared without blinking. Margaret reached beneath her blanket and produced a tiny velvet purse. I never spent the coins. Inside rested several gold sovereigns stamped with the Lancaster crest. They have poisoned my soul ever since. Her trembling fingers closed around Adrian's hand. Your wife remained faithful until the final moment. Those became her last words. She slipped peacefully into silence while tears gathered in Adrian's eyes for the first time since boyhood. The funeral bells had scarcely stopped ringing when another visitor arrived. Captain Nathan Hale entered Blackthorn Palace wearing the plain traveling coat of an ordinary gentleman rather than the polished uniform of his former service. He had come only to deliver official documents regarding relief funds for flood-damaged villages. Adrian insisted he remain for supper. During the meal, conversation drifted toward the violent storm that had nearly claimed Isabella's life. I owe you more than gratitude, Adrian said quietly. You saved my wife and my son. Nathan lowered his cup. I did only what honor required. Adrian hesitated. I often wondered whether fate spared me years ago for moments like that. Nathan looked puzzled. What do you mean? Lady Vivian told me she rescued me after the border ambush. Nathan's expression changed instantly. She said that? Adrian nodded slowly. Nathan remained silent for several moments before speaking. Your Grace, the woman arrived after the battle ended. Adrian's pulse quickened. I pulled you from the burning carriage myself. The words echoed through the dining chamber. You? Nathan reached into his leather satchel and unfolded an old military report bearing faded royal seals. It records every surviving witness. Adrian recognized signatures from officers long deceased. Nathan continued quietly. You never knew because I requested reassignment immediately afterward. Public recognition never interested me. Adrian's hands trembled as he read the report. Every official statement named Captain Nathan Hale as the man who had carried the unconscious Duke away moments before enemy fire consumed the convoy. Vivian's name appeared nowhere. Everything he had believed for years cracked apart like thin ice beneath heavy footsteps. That evening Adrian climbed alone to his grandmother's abandoned study. Moonlight spilled across shelves filled with leather-bound histories and fading family portraits. Dust covered Eleanor's writing desk exactly as she had left it. Inside the lowest drawer rested the sealed envelope he had locked away after her death. For a long time he simply stared at the crimson wax. Finally he broke the seal. Several folded pages slid onto the desk. The first contained Eleanor's graceful handwriting. My dear Adrian, if you are reading this, truth has finally become more precious to you than comfort. His chest tightened. He continued. I investigated Lady Vivian because my instincts refused to trust appearances. Everything enclosed has been verified through witnesses, magistrates, bankers, and servants beyond her influence. Dozens of documents followed. Signed testimonies. Receipts for bribes. Forged correspondence copied beside authentic letters. Bank transfers hidden through distant estates. Statements from dismissed servants who refused corruption. One page described an intercepted message Isabella had written during Adrian's travels. My beloved husband, the letter began, I pray each sunrise keeps you safe. Every heartbeat within me reminds me that our child deserves the father I know you truly are. The letter had never reached him. Another page documented payments made to destroy similar messages over many months. Each discovery struck harder than the last. Adrian realized Isabella had spent their separation writing faithfully while he believed her silent. She had waited. He had doubted. She had loved. He had condemned. Before dawn he collapsed into the chair where Eleanor had uncovered every hidden deception before illness stole her strength. Grief consumed him until breathing itself became painful. He finally understood that the greatest betrayal inside Blackthorn Palace had never belonged to Isabella or even to Vivian alone. It had belonged to his own willingness to believe convenient lies instead of the steadfast character of the woman who had shared his name. At sunrise he saddled his horse without summoning servants, carrying only Eleanor's letter, Nathan's report, and unbearable regret. Village after village offered the same mysterious answer whenever he described Isabella. Some smiled gently. Others pointed toward distant roads. All repeated identical words that filled him with equal hope and despair. "If you seek the Lady of the Orphans," one weathered priest finally whispered, "stop searching for a duchess. Search instead for the woman every abandoned child already calls mother." 5 more years transformed a forgotten farmhouse into a place spoken of with quiet reverence across England. Travelers called it Haven House. Widows found honest work there. Hungry children found warm bread before questions. Wealthy merchants occasionally arrived carrying generous donations, yet many left with their purses unopened because the woman who led the orphanage accepted only what preserved dignity rather than dependence. Compassion had become the estate's greatest wealth, and every sunrise began with laughter instead of loneliness. Isabella never allowed anyone to call her Duchess. To the smallest child she was simply Mother Isabella. She rose before dawn each morning, baked bread beside elderly volunteers, bandaged scraped knees, taught letters beneath flowering apple trees, and read stories by candlelight after supper. Hardship had not hardened her heart. Instead, suffering had refined every gentle quality she already possessed into quiet strength that inspired everyone around her. Little Oliver grew among dozens of children who knew nothing of titles. Although born heir to one of England's greatest estates, he carried buckets of water beside every other child, scrubbed muddy boots without complaint, and shared toys freely. Isabella wanted him to inherit kindness before privilege, believing character would always outlast inherited power. Meanwhile, Adrian searched relentlessly. He crossed counties during bitter winters, visited monasteries, village schools, hospitals, churches, remote farms. Everywhere he encountered stories about one remarkable woman who never spoke of herself but somehow remembered every orphan's birthday. One baker smiled while wrapping fresh loaves. "She paid for my daughter's medicine when I had nothing." An elderly carpenter added quietly, "She refused to let me work for free. She said charity without respect wounds both giver and receiver." A widow simply whispered, "She taught my boys that being poor never meant being worthless." Every testimony deepened Adrian's regret. The woman he had abandoned had quietly become the conscience of countless strangers. One bright spring afternoon he finally reached Haven House. Wildflowers surrounded simple stone buildings repaired with patient hands rather than lavish expense. Children's laughter drifted across green fields where vegetable gardens flourished beside fruit orchards. Wooden swings hung from ancient oak branches, while chickens wandered fearlessly between smiling youngsters chasing one another across open grass. Nothing resembled a royal estate. Everything resembled home. Adrian dismounted silently. No servant hurried to greet him. No trumpet announced his arrival. Instead he heard children singing while washing vegetables gathered from the garden. Near the center courtyard a woman knelt beside a frightened little girl struggling to mend a torn doll. Her brown hair had been braided simply beneath a linen bonnet. Her dress bore careful patches stitched with remarkable neatness. She smiled gently as she repaired the doll's tiny sleeve. Only when she stood did Adrian finally recognize her. Time had changed Isabella. The sorrow once shadowing her face had disappeared. Peace had taken its place. She looked stronger than he remembered, not because life had spared her pain, but because she had learned to transform pain into tenderness. For a long moment he simply watched. She never looked toward him. Her attention remained completely upon the children surrounding her. A small boy stumbled while carrying fresh bread toward the dining hall. Without thinking, Adrian hurried forward and caught the basket before it struck the ground. The child looked up gratefully. "Thank you, sir." Another boy approached carrying half a loaf already broken into uneven pieces. His bright gray eyes reminded Adrian painfully of someone he once knew. "You look hungry," the child said. "You can have mine." He extended the larger half. Adrian accepted it with trembling hands. "What is your name?" "Oliver." The world stopped. Adrian could barely breathe. "My mother says bread tastes better when nobody eats alone." The boy smiled with complete innocence. He had no idea he stood before his own father. Tears blurred Adrian's vision. He knelt slowly until they stood eye to eye. "You are very generous." Oliver shrugged happily. "Mother says kindness grows if you keep giving it away." The simple wisdom shattered whatever remained of Adrian's pride. Before another word could be spoken, Isabella finally noticed the unfamiliar traveler speaking with her son. She walked calmly toward them. Her eyes met Adrian's. Recognition did not come immediately. Years had weathered both faces. Only after several silent heartbeats did surprise quietly soften her expression. Neither spoke. Neither moved. Oliver glanced curiously between them. "Mother?" She rested one reassuring hand upon his shoulder. "It is all right." Her voice remained gentle, though countless memories stirred behind calm eyes. Adrian lowered his gaze. "I have no right to ask forgiveness." She answered only with silence. The wind carried children's laughter between them, making the quiet somehow more powerful than argument. Adrian left before sunset. The following morning he returned carrying lumber across his shoulders. A broken fence near the vegetable garden needed replacing. Without introducing himself, he simply began repairing it. No one stopped him. The next day he repaired leaking roof tiles above the schoolroom. Then he sharpened farm tools, mended broken chairs, planted young fruit trees, stacked firewood before winter. Each evening he departed without expecting thanks. Each dawn he returned before the children awoke. Weeks became months. The children slowly accepted the quiet stranger who worked harder than anyone else. They began calling him Mr. Adrian. The name touched him more deeply than any royal title ever had. One rainy afternoon Oliver proudly handed him a freshly carved wooden whistle. "You work here now." Adrian smiled through tears. "I hope so." Isabella observed everything without interfering. She never encouraged the children toward him. Neither did she pull them away. Trust, she believed, could never be demanded. It had to grow naturally. One evening she found Adrian repairing an old rocking horse abandoned beyond the barn. "It belonged to our first orphan," she said softly. "I know." He carefully sanded rough wood. "I wanted another child to love it." She studied him quietly. "This place has changed you." He shook his head. "No. It has shown me the man I should have been long ago." For the first time, sadness rather than bitterness filled the silence between them. Hope, fragile as new leaves after winter, quietly began taking root. That fragile piece shattered before sunrise 3 days later. The thunder of galloping horses echoed across the fields as frightened children rushed from their beds toward the windows. Black-clad crown soldiers surrounded Haven House, their banners snapping sharply in the cold morning wind. At their head rode Lady Vivian Lancaster wearing elegant riding clothes and the same triumphant smile Isabella had seen years earlier from the palace balcony. Raising an official-looking decree high above the gathered crowd, Vivian announced that the orphanage stood illegally upon crown property and would be seized immediately. Mothers clutched crying children. Volunteers formed a protective line before the schoolhouse. Adrian stepped instinctively toward Isabella, but she never retreated. Standing calmly beside the frightened orphans she loved as her own, she lifted her chin with quiet courage while distant hoofbeats thundered from beyond the eastern hills, carrying unseen riders racing toward a battle that would decide far more than land. The frightened silence outside Haven House lasted only a heartbeat before the distant thunder of approaching horses grew louder. Every child instinctively gathered behind Isabella, clutching one another's hands while volunteers formed a living wall around them. Adrian stepped forward, placing himself between the soldiers and the orphanage without reaching for a weapon. He had once defended kingdoms with titles and commands. Now he defended helpless children with nothing except the courage he had nearly forgotten. Lady Vivian guided her horse into the courtyard with regal confidence, her polished boots untouched by mud. She unrolled a sealed decree bearing what appeared to be the royal crest. "By authority of the crown," she declared, "this estate is hereby reclaimed as royal property. Every occupant must leave immediately." A frightened little girl buried her face against Isabella's skirt. "Mother," she whispered, "are they taking our home?" Isabella gently brushed the child's hair from her face. "No one can steal love," she answered softly. "Whatever happens, we remain a family." The words strengthened trembling hearts more than any sword could have. Vivian smiled coldly. "How touching." She raised her hand toward the captain commanding the soldiers. "Begin the evacuation." The soldiers hesitated. Their captain glanced uneasily toward Adrian, recognizing the Duke despite his plain clothing. Before anyone moved, another column of riders entered the valley. Captain Nathan Hale led them. Behind him rode villagers from every surrounding county. Elderly farmers, blacksmiths, teachers, physicians, merchants, widows, and former palace servants filled the road until it seemed the countryside itself had come alive. Among them walked hundreds of young men and women who had once been frightened children rescued by Isabella. Some wore fine coats earned through honest professions. Others still carried simple work clothes stained with labor. Every face reflected unwavering gratitude. Nathan dismounted and approached the soldiers calmly. "No blood will be spilled here." Vivian laughed. "You think peasants can oppose the crown?" "They are not opposing the crown," Nathan replied. "They are defending justice." Another sound echoed through the valley. This time it was the rumble of elegant royal carriages. A carriage bearing the king's standard rolled through the open gates and stopped in the center of the courtyard. Royal guards stepped aside as an elderly messenger emerged carrying a polished oak chest secured with black iron clasps. He bowed respectfully toward Isabella before addressing the gathering. "I carry the final instructions of His Majesty." Vivian's confident smile wavered. The messenger lifted an official document. "Lady Vivian Lancaster, you have requested enforcement of property rights. Before any judgment may be executed, His Majesty has ordered the presentation of evidence entrusted years ago to the crown by the late Dowager Duchess Eleanor Blackthorn." The oak chest opened. Inside rested neatly organized files bearing Eleanor's unmistakable seal. The messenger began reading. Each statement struck with devastating precision. Bank ledgers documenting secret bribes. Witness testimonies sworn before magistrates. Copies of forged letters. Payments made to dismiss loyal servants. Evidence proving Isabella's correspondence had been deliberately destroyed. Official military reports identifying Captain Nathan Hale, not Vivian, as the man who had rescued Adrian years earlier. Gasps spread across the crowd. Several soldiers exchanged shocked glances. Nathan remained silent. Adrian closed his eyes briefly, hearing every painful truth spoken aloud before the entire kingdom. Vivian's composure shattered. "Those papers are lies," she shouted. "They were fabricated." The royal messenger calmly produced one final parchment. "This document bears the king's personal seal confirming that every record has been independently verified." He handed it directly to the captain commanding the soldiers. The officer studied it only briefly before removing his helmet. Turning toward Vivian, he spoke with solemn respect. "Lady Vivian Lancaster, by order of the crown, you are under arrest for fraud, forgery, blackmail, obstruction of royal justice, and conspiracy against the House of Blackthorn." Her face turned pale. "You cannot arrest me." Two guards stepped forward. She attempted to flee toward her horse, but the villagers blocked every escape without lifting a single weapon. The same people she had always considered beneath her now stood united by the woman she had tried to destroy. Iron shackles closed around her wrists. As she was led away, she looked desperately toward Adrian. "You owe me." He met her gaze calmly. "No. I owed gratitude to the person who truly saved my life." His eyes shifted toward Nathan. "I simply gave it to the wrong person." Silence settled after the guards departed. The royal messenger reached once more into the oak chest. "There remains one final matter." He unfolded a parchment edged with blue ribbon. Years before her passing, Dowager Duchess Eleanor Blackthorn legally transferred ownership of this entire estate into the name of Isabella Ashcroft Blackthorn. Isabella stared in disbelief. The messenger smiled gently. The Dowager believed this land would someday become exactly what it has become. He handed her the deed. "Your Grace, Haven House has always belonged to you." Tears gathered quietly in Isabella's eyes. She looked across the gardens where children laughed despite everything they had witnessed. The home she had built through sacrifice had never truly been in danger. It had been protected by a woman who had loved her like a daughter until the very end. The crowd slowly dispersed, leaving only the children, volunteers, Nathan, Adrian, and Isabella beneath the afternoon sky. Adrian stepped into the muddy courtyard. Without hesitation he knelt. There were no jeweled floors. No orchestra. No applauding nobles. Only damp earth beneath his knees. Oliver watched with puzzled curiosity. "Duke Adrian," Isabella said softly, "you owe me nothing now." He lifted his eyes. "I owe you everything." His voice trembled with complete honesty. "I will never erase the day I chose pride over trust. I will never reclaim the years our son lost with his father. I cannot return the tears you cried alone or the storms you endured without me. But I am no longer asking you to return to Blackthorn Palace." He glanced toward the distant hills where the palace towers could barely be seen. "I finally understand that it was never our home." His gaze returned to Isabella. "You built a kingdom where abandoned children became sons and daughters, where broken people recovered their dignity, where love mattered more than blood or title. If you permit it, I do not ask for my place as your husband." He paused. "I ask for the chance to earn a place among the people you have already saved." The courtyard remained completely still. Oliver slowly walked toward Adrian. "Mother?" Isabella looked into her son's hopeful eyes, then toward Nathan, who answered with the smallest approving nod. Forgiveness, she realized, did not erase justice. It completed it when repentance became genuine. She stepped forward. Instead of asking Adrian to rise, she offered him her hand. He accepted it carefully, almost afraid the moment might vanish. Years of grief finally loosened their hold. The children erupted into joyful cheers. Some laughed. Others cried openly. Little Oliver threw his arms around both parents, holding them together with the simple certainty only a child possessed. Months later, Adrian formally resigned the privileges of daily palace life, appointing trusted stewards to manage the Blackthorn estates while he devoted himself to Haven House. Beside Isabella, he expanded the orphanage into England's first royal sanctuary where abandoned children received education, skilled training, medical care, and unconditional love. Nathan accepted the role of protector and teacher, remaining part of the family he had unknowingly saved years before. Every hall echoed with music, learning, and laughter instead of loneliness. One golden evening, as hundreds of children played beneath blossoming trees, Oliver slipped his small hand into his father's and asked, "Where is your kingdom now?" Adrian smiled, looking not toward the distant palace standing magnificent yet empty upon the horizon, but toward the joyful faces surrounding Isabella. "Right here," he answered. "I almost lost it because I mistook pride for love." Together they walked through the gardens hand in hand while the children raced ahead, proving that the greatest kingdoms are never inherited through crowns, but patiently built through compassion, humility, forgiveness, and hearts courageous enough to choose love above everything else.